Good morning, YouTube. Warbles on a lot here, Sunday, 29th of April. We're going to listen to background briefing. It'll probably be in 3 parts. We're talking about the Murray-Darling Basin. I happen to have a copy of the Enquiry into the Impact of the Guide to the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, because if you make a submission, they send you a copy.
Think Wombles of Wimbledon and all that, but with a lot more sheep on it. But in those difficult times, the commons were great for poor people in particular who could graze their livestock without having to own any land of their own. But with each person tending to want to use it to the max, the commons soon were reduced to bare earth. Nobody had any responsibility for it. Privatising the gains of a public asset, damaging it and socialising the loss, well, that, in a nutshell, is the tragedy of the commons. And experts say that is what Australia is facing now with the Murray-Darling Basin. Starting this week, Background Briefing unravels the Murray-Darling Basin Plan in a special 2-part investigation. The plan is a major taxpayer investment, about $13 billion in total, to try and restore the Murray-Darling river system to health. Big money, but the basin is hugely important. It contains 2 out of every 5 farms in Australia. It provides water to about 3 million people, and along its riverways you can also find 16 internationally significant wetlands. And at the very end, it becomes the lagoons of the Coorong in South Australia. It is a protected wetland where reporter Sarah Dingle travelled for this story.
I'm standing at the very end of the biggest river system in the country, the Murray-Darling Basin. It's a beautiful sunny afternoon, but you can see a storm building on the horizon. The multi-billion-dollar basin plan, which aims to preserve this place, is not going well. The head of the Basin Authority, who oversees the plan, warns there is no alternative.
A hell of a lot of research, a hell of a lot of work's gone into this, and it would be a terrible shame to see that lost.
The Murray-Darling Basin runs from Queensland in the north right down to where I am, a giant lagoon in South Australia. It's not enough just to look at this place, you have to get wet.
This might be a process of actually having to get our shoes off and walk in the water. Do you want to do that?
Yeah, what are we going to see when we walk in the water?
I can find you a little bit of itchy bracer.
Okay, let's do that. Along with ecologist David Patton, I'm at the southern end of what's known as the Coorong. This is supposed to be the Eden of the Murray-Darling Basin system, a watery paradise for wildlife. So we're walking through this very soft, fine sand. Fragile, long-legged waders, fat duck and black swans are all meant to flourish here. That's how it was when David Patton was a boy half a century ago.
I had a mother who was interested in natural history, and a grandfather too. She was teaching at a spring school, and I came down to help her catch birds and show people bush birds. So I would have been about 15 then. In a place like this at the right time, you would have had probably 500 shorebirds just in a stretch of a couple of 100 metres of shoreline.
We've waded quite a way out into the lagoon. So we're standing knee-deep in the southern lagoon of the Coorong, and you want me to taste this water?
Yeah, because it's the only way you actually know what the salinity is.
Okay. Oh, it's like the strongest saltwater gargle you've ever had.
As you keep coming down the Coorong, this 110 kilometre lagoon, the salinity gradually increases. And it increases to be 2 to 3 times saltier than seawater in winter for the South Lagoon, but it's typically 3.5 times saltier than seawater.
It's often said that World War III will be fought over water. Australia is the driest inhabited continent on Earth. 6 years ago, worried about the health of our biggest river system, the federal government signed into law the most expensive environmental project in our country's history. It's called the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, $13 billion taxpayer dollars over 12 years. The aim was to rescue the river system. Sounds great. But what worries me is if the basin plan goes wrong, it's my generation and the generations that follow that will have to deal with it. And we'll have $13 billion less to do that in a world short on water. That's why I've come to the Coorong. I want to see for myself what's happening at the mouth of the Murray-Darling Basin. Rivers die from the mouth up. The shores of the South Lagoon feel empty and still. David Patton says the sand we're walking on should be covered in bird tracks.
So there's just one little set of tracks running across several square metres of soil. This whole place would have had covered in footprints of little shorebird footprints.
Right.
There was hardly any at all.
The Coorong is on what's called the Ramsar list, a catalogue of the most important wetlands around the globe, which signatory countries say they'll protect. It's like the wetlands version of the World Heritage List. There are 16 Ramsar sites across the Murray-Darling Basin, but out of all of them, the Coorong has the greatest wealth of water birds. Critically endangered species like the curlew sandpiper fly quite literally from Siberia to the Coorong every year. David Patton has a pet name for these birds.
We often refer to them as little peeps because that's the little noise they make.
Curlew sandpipers are small birds and very cute. They have neat little round bodies with long, delicate bills. There are 0 here today, so I had to turn to the internet to find out how they sound. Curlew sandpipers were just some of the many species lining the shores of the Coorong until recently.
There are descriptions of the sky being black with birds. A typical number of birds in the Coorong is probably between 150 to 200,000. And that's a nice mix of species. We might get 130,000 or something like that this year. It might be a bit higher, but it's made up of just one species, which is not what the system is like.
Ecologist David Patton has been collecting wildlife data in the Coorong for about 3 decades. His work shows that in the last 2 years, the numbers of birds which make this place so special have hit a record low. The first year was bad, and then in the second year, the populations couldn't recover.
They're record low numbers now because there wasn't easy access to food resources last year when these birds would have needed it.
So, what went wrong? We're not out here in the lagoon to have a paddle. David and I are looking for an important aquatic plant which normally really likes shallow, salty water. It's called Ruppia tuberosa.
At this time of year, because the water levels drop, you'd actually expect to see plants growing here. And they're not. I mean, I'm actually surprised that there is no Ruppia tuberosa actually present here.
So we're knee-deep in water now.
Just
Can't see the bottom.
30 centimetres, that's right, because it doesn't go beyond about 30 centimetres.
And there's no Ruppia tuberosa.
No, you'd feel it with our feet. You can feel the plants if they were there. And I could have told you there's nothing here because there are no ducks here. And we should have some.
Ruppia tuberosa is small and grassy. It looks a bit like chives. The migratory birds of the Coorong carbo-load on this plant, fattening up for their long trip home to the other side of the planet. But the Ruppia is threatened by algae, which catches onto it and rips its delicate roots out.
For the last 3 or 4 years, algae have dominated the system and disrupted its ecological character.
Like elsewhere in the basin, the Coorong's wildlife has been in slow decline for the last 30 years, as drought and increasingly water-intensive agriculture have taken their toll. But on top of that, in the last 3 or 4 years, so during the Basin Plan, the Coorong has had another big problem to deal with. I've arrived here just at the end of a massive algal bloom.
It's only in the last few years that this suddenly is everywhere and it's wrecking access to the food supply as well as wrecking the food supply.
David Patton says the Basin Plan hasn't prevented the damage to the Coorong.
The way in which the government officials hide behind the plan is to say, oh, we don't expect the environment to recover until we've delivered the plan, until maybe 5 years, 10 years after that. Oh, come on, wake up. You should be seeing responses, and there might be little places where they've put a bit of environmental water in, where you've got a response of that, but collectively across the system, there's probably not going to be any gain at all, net gain.
Algae is bad news for the birds. In the Coorong, it kills the rupia, and the birds have nothing to eat. So how many birds should we see here at this time of year?
Over a sort of bay like this, which produces rupia tuberosa, you'd expect 1,000 duck.
We've got 6 birds.
6 birds, which are a couple of silver gulls, a couple of fish-eating grebes, and a handful of red-capped plovers on the shoreline.
That's pretty sad.
It is sad, but I'm used to it.
In the last few years, birds that have travelled here from places like Siberia have been unable to survive. David Patton says the migratory shorebirds should be spending their time getting fat, but instead, they're starving.
Little sandpipers, red-necked stints and sharp-tailed sandpipers and curlew sandpipers, their numbers have been dropping, but they're spending up to 90% of their daytime foraging when they're here. Any bird that spends 90% of its time foraging in January, 2 months before it's due to fatten, is struggling. It doesn't have enough food. These birds are skinny, they look like they've starved, and my feeling is that's a direct reflection of the quality of the habitat.
The result is inevitable. On the little islands in the lagoon, away from foxes, David Patton finds the birds which have starved to death.
So certainly we find them out on the islands. When we do go onto them, rarely you can find these dead, emaciated shorebirds sitting on the amongst the rocks and so forth where they've clearly died. And sometimes you'll find 20 or 30.
And these birds, are any of them critically endangered species?
Some of them are now listed as critically endangered. Curlew sandpipers is one of those. So it's amazing to think I counted 40,000 of those in the 1980s in just the South Lagoon.
His most recent count of curlew sandpipers from last summer puts them at less than 1,000.
We have seen the moods of the Coorong.
I'm in a white Colorado ute, heading towards the north of the Coorong with local Tracy Hill.
I had a friend at Mount Barker High School, and she used to talk about this place called the Coorong, where she used to go on school holidays with her uncle and auntie. And she used to come back and go, oh, we went out, we caught some fish, and then we went for a walk across the beach. And I'm going, oh, it sounds fantastic. I'd love to go to a place like that. Anyway, moved to Meningie with my family, met my first husband, and he was friends with her cousins, and they had that shack down here.
Tracy Hill is bundled up in a beanie and a jumper, and as you can tell, she's the kind of person who's up for pretty much anything.
That marriage broke up and met Glenn, who just happened to be a fisherman, and I went, I get to go out the Coorong lots now. So it was meant to be, I reckon, to live down here and be a fisherman's wife.
We're heading to Tracy's place, which she shares with her husband, Glenn. So, we've come back to your place because it's just blowing a gale out there.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So you do sales from this place. There's only the two of us at home, so we decided to convert our house into a shop front. The Hills run a successful seafood business out of their home. This means that, unlike most people, they have a fish factory in their backyard. Hi, Sam. How are you doing? What are you filleting?
Oh, I'm just doing head.
And these are mullets. Oh, these are the Coorong mullets. So you just slice through the head there and pull out the guts?
Yeah, just like this. Like that.
The Hills have been fishing the Coorong for more than a quarter of a century, and in that time, they've seen some changes.
It's absolutely clear that the poor management of the river system has had a huge impact on the productivity of the Coorong. I've heard the old-time fishermen talk about how much flounder I used to pull out of the Southern Lagoon. 20 tonne a month used to come out of the Southern Lagoon. Now, if we get 20 kilos, we think we're doing really well. And bream, same thing. Tonnes and tonnes of bream used to come out of the Southern Lagoon. We don't get anything of the production that we used to get.
It's a Sunday, and I'm not the only visitor. The Hills' friend Faith Coleman has popped around with her son. Faith Coleman is an environmental consultant by trade, like the river before her. She says what the Coorong needs is simple: more water coming down the river.
You need to flush things out. You need to clean things out.
One key objective of the Basin Plan is to make sure that enough water is put back into the rivers so that the end of the system, the Murray mouth next to the Coorong, stays open to the sea. Faith Coleman has a simple, effective, kind of disgusting way of putting it.
Running a river like a series of lakes is like going to the toilet.
Okay, that's the upload limit. Back immediately.